Welcome to Elite Success Audiobooks. What you are about to hear is not a lecture. It is not a motivational speech. It is not a collection of pleasant ideas designed to make you feel temporarily inspired before you return to the same life you have always lived. What you are about to hear is a transmission, a precise, deeply practical, and permanently life-altering revelation of the single most powerful force that has ever existed within you, a force you have carried since the moment you were born, a force that has been operating every single day of your life, shaping every circumstance you have encountered, drawing every person you have met, constructing every condition you have lived in, and doing all of this entirely without your conscious awareness or direction. That force is your imagination. And once you truly understand what imagination is, not as a vague daydream or an idle fantasy, but as the very engine of your reality, the very substance of your soul, the very presence of the divine within you, nothing in your life will ever look or feel the same again. Stay with this. Do not turn away. What is coming will change you. I rest not from my great task, to open the eternal worlds, to open the immortal eyes of man inwards into the worlds of thought, into eternity, ever expanding in the bosom of God, the human imagination. William Blake, Jerusalem. Certain words, through long and careless use, gather so many different and conflicting meanings that they almost cease to communicate anything at all. They become hollow containers, poured into by everyone, and meaning something different to each person who uses them. Such a word is imagination. This single word has been made to carry all manner of ideas, some of them directly opposed to one another. We use it to mean fancy, thought, hallucination, suspicion, creativity, delusion. So wide is its application, so scattered its meanings, that the word imagination has no stable standing, no fixed significance in the minds of most people who speak it. Consider how we use this word in ordinary conversation. We ask a man to use his imagination, meaning that his present perspective is too narrow, too confined, too small for the task in front of him. In the very next breath, we tell someone else that his ideas are pure imagination, meaning that they are baseless, unfounded, untrue. We speak of a jealous man or a suspicious woman as a victim of their own imagination, suggesting that what they perceive has no correspondence with reality. And then, moments later, we pay the highest tribute to a visionary leader by calling him a man of imagination, the same word used to mean strength and weakness, truth and delusion, creation and distortion, all within the same conversation, without anyone noticing the contradiction. Even the dictionary offers no rescue. It defines imagination as the picturing power or act of the mind, the constructive or creative principle. It also defines it as a phantasm, and then as an irrational notion or belief, and then as planning, plotting, or scheming as involving mental construction. 4 definitions, 3 of them, at minimum, in tension with one another, and none of them pointing toward what imagination truly is. I am going to tell you what imagination truly is, and I want you to hold what I am about to say in the deepest, most attentive part of your mind, because it will require you to dissolve ideas you have held since childhood. I identify the central figure of the Gospels, the one called Jesus the Christ, with human imagination, not as metaphor, not as poetry, not as an interesting spiritual framework that you can choose to adopt or discard. I identify imagination with Christ in the most literal, most practical, most life-changing sense possible. I am saying that the divine power described in every page of the New Testament, the power that heals the sick, raises the dead, feeds the multitude, calms the storm, and forgives sin, is the power of your own awakened imagination. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. John 1-3. 1. And that substance is imagination. Every form you see, every circumstance you inhabit, every relationship you navigate, every success you have achieved, and every limitation you have suffered, all of it, without exception, is the direct product of imagination, not someone else's imagination imposing itself upon you from the outside. Your own imagination, operating according to the beliefs and assumptions and feelings you have most consistently entertained, has assembled the life you are currently living. This is not blame. This is liberation. Because if imagination built the world you are living in now, then imagination can build a different one. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Isaiah 53:3. It is not a tool you use occasionally when you want to feel better. It is not a supplement to the real mechanisms of life. It is the mechanism. It is the only mechanism. Everything else, every action, every conversation, every plan, every resource, every so-called opportunity is downstream of imagination. The visible world is the crystallized residue of what the invisible imagination has already done. The eternal body of man is the imagination. That is God himself, the divine body. William Blake. I know of no greater or truer definition of imagination than this. Not a tool, not a faculty, not a capacity. The eternal body, the divine body, the very substance of God, housed within the human being, operating through the human being, available to the human being, right now, in this moment, exactly as you are. By imagination, we possess the capacity to become anything we genuinely desire to be. Not by striving, not by forcing, not by accumulating more credentials, or more connections, or more money. By imagination. Through the application of imagination, we disarm the violence of the outer world and transmute it into something entirely different. Our most profound relationships and our most passing encounters alike become transformed when we begin to live imaginatively, when we begin to understand and practice the mystery that has been concealed across the ages, that Christ within us is our imagination. When this truth becomes not merely a concept you have heard, but a living reality you have tasted and proven in your own experience, you discover that only as you live by imagination can you truly be said to live at all. Every other mode of existence is, at best, a pale, mechanical approximation of what life is actually capable of being. I want this to be the most direct, the most honest, the most practically useful transmission I am capable of offering, so that it may encourage you to function imaginatively, to open what Blake called the immortal eyes inward into the worlds of thought, where you will see every desire of your heart already ripe and ready to be harvested. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. John 10:10. The abundant life that is promised is not reserved for a distant future. It is not waiting for you somewhere across the horizon of hard work and sacrifice. It is available now, but it cannot be accessed until you have the genuine, lived, experiential understanding of Christ as your imagination, not the historical figure, not the theological proposition, the living power within you, the awakened imagination, which is the only Christ that can transform your actual daily existence. The mystery, hid from the ages, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Colossians 1:26. This is the mystery I am perpetually striving to realize more deeply in my own life, and to awaken within every person who will receive it. Imagination is our Redeemer, the Lord from heaven, born of human nature, yet not confined by it. Every man and every woman is, in the mystical sense, Mary, and each of us must give birth to the Christ, the awakened imagination within ourselves. If the concept of Immaculate Conception and the birth of Christ appears irrational or impossible to the analytical mind, it is only because it has been persistently misread as external biography, as literal history, as cosmological fact about events that happened 2,000 years ago to someone else. The modern explorers of psychology have not helped matters by calling imagination the unconscious or the subconscious, as if naming and categorizing it were the same as understanding and activating it. Imagination's true birth and growth within a person is the gradual transition from a God of inherited tradition to a God of direct, personal, irrefutable experience. If this birth seems to move slowly in a person's life, it is only because the person is reluctant to release the comfortable but ultimately false security of received doctrine. When imagination is truly recognized as the first and foundational principle of all genuine religion, the rigid stone of literal understanding will have been touched, and from that rock will flow the water of living psychological meaning, capable of quenching the deepest thirst of a parched humanity. The Son of God is not to be discovered in historical records, not in any external institution, not in any religious organization. He can only be found as the awakening of imagination in the one within whom his presence becomes real and manifest. Oh, would thy heart but be a manger for his birth, God would once more become a child on earth. Man is the garden in which this divine principle sleeps. He awakens it by lifting his imagination upward, by persistently identifying himself with ideals that exceed his present conditions, by clothing the people around him in a more elevated reality than what the outer senses report. We must go on imagining better than the best we know, always further, always beyond, always in advance of where we currently stand. The supreme test of whether imagination has truly been awakened in you is this: can you forgive? Not in the passive, resigned sense of accepting what was done to you, in the creative, transformative, imaginative sense. Can you look at a person who has failed, including yourself, and inwardly identify that person with their highest ideal? Can you see them not as they appear in the evidence of the senses, but as they are capable of becoming in the vision of an awakened imagination. That capacity, the ability to imaginatively identify a person with their ideal rather than their failure, is the activity of Christ. It is the work of awakened imagination. It is the supreme work. Sin, in its truest meaning, is not moral transgression. Sin is an archery term. It means to miss the mark, to fall short of one's aim, to fail to reach one's intended target. Forgiveness, then, is not the wiping away of guilt. Forgiveness is the imaginative act of identifying the person, yourself or another, with the ideal they missed, with the mark they fell short of, as though they had already hit it. This is the work. This is what the awakened imagination does. Let the weak man say, I am strong. Joel 3:10. From a purely rational standpoint, this is nonsense. A weak man cannot simply say he is strong and expect the statement to be true. The rational mind knows the difference between what is and what is not. But awakened imagination operates in a different dimension entirely. It does not consult the evidence of the senses before determining what is real. It determines what is real, and the senses eventually conform. This is not wishful thinking. This is the law of creation. The invisible becomes visible. The assumed becomes actual. The imagined becomes experienced. This understanding of imagination as the living Christ raises questions that every thoughtful person must honestly confront. Is imagination powerful enough not merely to let me assume a state of strength or abundance or health, but also to actually execute and incarnate that assumption? Suppose I desired to be in a completely different situation than the one I currently occupy. A different financial condition, a different relationship, a different level of recognition or influence. Could I, purely by imagining myself into that state, bring about its physical manifestation? Suppose I lack the resources to make such a transition by ordinary means. Suppose my current circumstances seem to actively oppose the reality I want to experience. Would imagination alone be sufficient to bridge that gap? Does imagination comprehend reason? Does it recognize the evidence of the outer world? Is it a complete and trustworthy guide to daily behavior? And if I am capable of sustained, persistent imagination, if I can maintain the feeling of my wish already fulfilled, will that assumption solidify into fact? Experience, decades of personal, lived, often astonishing experience, has convinced me completely. An assumption, though initially false by every external measure, if persisted in with genuine feeling and consistent imagination, will harden into fact. Continuous imagination is sufficient for all things. Every reasonable plan and every strategic action will never compensate for the absence of continuous, feeling-soaked imagination. The plan without the assumption is hollow. The action without the imagined end is labor in the dark. Is it not true that the entire teaching of the Gospels can only be genuinely received through the exercise of faith? And is not faith, at its deepest level, simply the willingness to imagine what has not yet appeared, and to live from that imagined reality as though it were already so? Is the promise, believe that you receive, and you shall receive, not identical to imagine that you are, and you shall be? Truth is not dependent upon external facts. Truth depends upon the intensity and the persistence of imagination. Facts are the fruit, the outward evidence bearing witness to the use or misuse of imagination that preceded them. Man becomes what he imagines. He has a self-created, self-directed, and ultimately self-determined history. Where the ordinary person of the senses looks at a bare branch and sees only a bud, awakened imagination sees a rose already in full bloom. Truth cannot be enclosed or measured by facts. As we awaken to the imaginative life, we discover that to imagine a thing is to make it so, that a true judgment of what is real need not conform to the external evidence before us. The imaginative person does not deny the reality of the outer world. He sees it, he acknowledges it, but he understands that the outer world of appearances is not the source. It is the echo. It is not the cause. It is the effect. The inner world of continuous imagination is the force by which the entire outer world of becoming is brought into existence and maintained. He sees every outer event and circumstance as a projection of the inner activity of imagination, as a manifestation of the mental and emotional movements that have taken place, often without conscious awareness, within the depths of his own being. But he also knows, and this is the crucial understanding that changes everything, that every person must become consciously aware of this inner activity. Every person must begin to see the precise relationship between the inner causal world of imagination and the outer world of effects that surrounds them daily. The outer world is not happening to you, it is happening from you. It is a breathtaking discovery, the realization that you can imagine yourself into the state of your fulfilled desire and thereby escape from the prisons that ignorance has built around you. Prisons not made of stone or steel, but of unconsidered assumptions, inherited beliefs, and the habitual acceptance of conditions that imagination alone constructed and imagination alone can dissolve. The real man, the authentic, fully alive, fully operative human being, is a magnificent imagination. This is the self that must be awakened. This is the self that most people have never consciously met. Awake, thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. Ephesians 5:14. The moment a person genuinely discovers that their imagination is the Christ, the divine creative power within them, they begin to accomplish things that, from the outside, appear miraculous. But a miracle is simply a name given by those who do not understand the mechanics of imagination to the works of imagination. It is not supernatural. It is the most natural thing in the world. It is simply nature operating at a level that most people have never consciously accessed. You have been living imaginatively your entire life. The question has never been whether you are using imagination. You have always been using it. The question is whether you have been using it consciously or unconsciously, whether you have been deliberately choosing the assumptions from which imagination operates, or whether you have been passively accepting whatever assumptions your environment, your history, your fears, and your habits have installed in you. Unconscious imagination is still imagination. It still creates. It still projects its contents outward as experience. The suffering that most people endure is not the absence of imaginative power. It is the presence of imaginative power operating without awareness, without direction, without deliberate creative intention. The invitation in every word of this transmission is toward consciousness, toward wakefulness, toward the moment you stop being the unconscious instrument of imagination and become its conscious, intentional, sovereign operator. That is the awakening this title promises, not the awakening of some new faculty you did not previously possess. The awakening of the one you have always had to its own nature, its own power, its own creative sovereignty. Man must come firmly and irreversibly to believe that reality lies within, not without. The outer world, every person in it, every circumstance surrounding it, is rooted in the consciousness of the observer. It begins there, it lives there, and it changes there. Drop 111. My imagination is the gateway to my reality in the comments right now. Let this community see the moment you understood where reality truly begins. Until a person has the living, experiential sense of Christ as their imagination, until this is not a doctrine they believe, but a reality they inhabit, they will continue to see the world in pure objectivity, as a collection of external forces acting upon them from the outside. They will rebel at the suggestion that they have in any way chosen the conditions of their life, that those conditions bear any relationship to their own mental and emotional activity, because they have never learned to look inward, because no one ever told them that looking inward is not weakness or escapism, but the most precise, most powerful, and most direct form of engagement with reality available to any human being. Although others have bodies, lives of their own, histories entirely different from your own, their reality is rooted in the consciousness through which you perceive them. This is not a statement that reduces other people to mere projections and denies their genuine humanity. It is a statement about the nature of perception, about the fact that what you encounter in any relationship, in any circumstance, in any event, is always filtered through, colored by, and shaped by the state of consciousness from which you are perceiving it. Change the state, and not only does your interpretation change, the actual behavior of the people and the actual character of the circumstances change in correspondence. This has been verified by too many people across too many different situations and centuries to be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. The journey we are about to take together through the remaining parts of this transmission will move through the specific, practical, proven mechanisms by which imagination operates. You will hear stories, real stories, drawn from real lives, including my own, that demonstrate exactly how imagination, when consciously directed and faithfully sustained, produces circumstances that no amount of rational effort alone could have generated. You will discover how to revise the past, not in denial, but in the most precise and transformative way possible. You will understand the nature and the creative power of your inner speech, the conversation you are perpetually conducting with yourself beneath the level of ordinary awareness. You will learn how to enter and inhabit states of consciousness that correspond to your desires, so that those desires are no longer wishes held at arm's length, but realities already occupied in the imagination, pressing naturally and irresistibly toward physical manifestation. This is not philosophy in the abstract. This is a practical, field-tested, proven guide for the deliberate operation of the most powerful creative force in existence, your imagination. The Christ within you, the Lord from heaven, housed in your very own consciousness, available to you in this very moment, requiring nothing from you except your willingness to awaken to what you already are. The first power that meets us at the threshold of the soul's domain is the power of imagination. Dr. Franz Hartmann. I was first made genuinely conscious of the power, the nature, and the redemptive function of imagination through the teachings of my friend Abdullah. He was a man unlike anyone I had encountered before, or have encountered since. A man who had so thoroughly and completely identified himself with the truth of imagination that every conversation with him was an encounter with the principle itself. And through the sustained experience of knowing him, of receiving his instruction, and then of watching that instruction prove itself in the raw, undeniable territory of my own lived experience, I arrived at a series of understandings that I have never been able to retreat from, because life itself has continued to confirm them, relentlessly and without exception. Through those experiences and the ones that followed, I learned that Jesus was a symbol of imagination coming into full manifestation in a human being, a portrait of what becomes possible when imagination is no longer dormant, but fully awakened and consciously directed. I learned that the test of his birth within any individual is that individual's ability to forgive sin, which, as we established in the first part of this transmission, means the ability to imaginatively identify oneself or another with their ideal, their aim, their highest possibility, regardless of what the evidence of the present moment appears to indicate. Without this imaginative identification, without this willingness to see the person beyond their present failure, the forgiveness of sin is not merely difficult, it is an impossibility. And only the Son of God, which is to say, only the awakened imagination, can accomplish it. Therefore, the measure of how fully imagination has awakened in you is precisely this. Can you look at the gap between where someone is and where they desire to be, including yourself, and imaginatively close that gap, seeing the person as already there, already whole, already aligned with their aim? When Abdullah first shared these ideas with me, they shocked me, they repelled me. I was, at that time, a committed and sincere Christian in the conventional sense, and I had not yet understood that authentic Christianity cannot be absorbed merely through the accident of being raised within a particular culture or family tradition. It must be consciously adopted, consciously chosen as an active, daily, creative way of life. It must be lived, not inherited, practiced, not merely professed. But this truth, which initially disturbed and unsettled me, gradually worked its way through layers of resistance and entered my understanding through a different door, through visions, through mystical experiences, and through the kind of practical, verifiable, undeniable demonstration that the rational mind cannot argue away without compromising its own integrity. And I must confess that the period of transition, the time when the old foundations are being dissolved before the new ones are fully established, is genuinely trying. When everything you have taken for granted begins to shake, it is not comfortable. But it is necessary. There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Mark 13:2. Not one stone of rigid, literal understanding can remain once you have tasted the water of living, psychological meaning. Everything that natural religion has constructed through centuries of literal interpretation is gathered and transformed in the fire of genuine inner revelation. Yet what better, what truer way is there to understand the Christ than to identify that central figure of the Gospels with the human imagination? To understand that every time you exercise your imagination lovingly on behalf of another person, every time you hold them in a vision of their highest and best self, you are, in the most literal sense available, mediating the divine to the human. And that conversely, whenever you imagine evil about another, whenever you hold them fixed in a vision of their failure or their guilt or their unworthiness, you are doing the opposite of that sacred work. I asked myself many times if my imagination is indeed this living Christ, and all things are possible to the Christ. Are all things then possible to me? This was not an arrogant question. It was an honest one. And the answer, proven through experience rather than argument, is yes, conditional on one thing. I must genuinely identify myself with my aim. I must not merely think about the goal from the outside, as an observer contemplating something desirable, but not yet real. I must imaginatively step inside the goal, inhabit it, live from it, see the world from within it. When I do that, when imagination is genuinely fused with the state desired, the Christ is awake in me, and everything that was impossible to me before becomes the natural unfolding of what I have already become in imagination. What a profound comfort this understanding brings, to know that everything I experience is the direct result of my own consciousness, my own standard of beliefs, my own imaginative activity, is not a burden. It is freedom, because if the conditions of my life reflect the state of my consciousness, then I need not wait for the world to change in order for my experience to change. I need only change the state from which I am viewing and inhabiting the world. The world presents itself differently to different states of consciousness. What appears when you are identified with one state cannot even be seen when you are no longer fused with it. By state, I mean everything that a person believes and consents to as true, the total sum of their inner agreements with what is real and what is possible. The state from which we perceive and think determines the objective world in which we appear to live. Two people standing in the same room at the same moment occupy entirely different worlds because they are not in the same state. They are not seeing from the same inner location. The wealthy person and the impoverished person, the person of deep generosity and the habitual taker, they are not who they are because of what has happened to them from the outside. They are who they are by virtue of the states from which they habitually view and inhabit the world. Change the state, and you change the world. There is no exception to this. In the fall of 1933, in New York City, I brought a problem to Abdullah. He received me with his characteristic directness and asked one simple question: "What do you want?" I told him that I desired to spend the winter in Barbados, the island of my origin, where my family was, where I felt most alive. But I was, at that moment, completely without financial resources. I did not have so much as a single coin in my pocket. By every external measure, Barbados was not a realistic possibility. Abdullah looked at me calmly and said, "If you will imagine yourself to be in Barbados, thinking from that state of consciousness, viewing the world from there instead of merely thinking about Barbados from here, you will spend the winter there. You must not concern yourself at all with the ways and the means of getting there. The state of consciousness of already being in Barbados, if truly occupied by your imagination, will devise the means best suited to realize itself. This is the principle. This is the entire secret, expressed in its most essential form. Man lives by committing himself to invisible states, by fusing his imagination with what he knows to be other than his present condition. And in that act of fusion, he experiences the results of the union. The state does the work. The state finds the means. The state devises the path. But the person must first fully enter the state. No, one can lose what they genuinely have except by detaching their imagination from the state in which those things have their natural life. And no one need remain without what they desire if they are willing to imaginatively inhabit the state in which that desire is already fulfilled. You must imagine yourself right into the state of your fulfilled desire, Abdullah told me, and fall asleep viewing the world from Barbados, not viewing Barbados. This distinction is everything. The difference between thinking of the end and thinking from the end is the difference between wishing and creating, between hoping and possessing, between the observer and the participant. We must use imagination as a partaker, as one who is already there, not as an onlooker who is contemplating a desirable destination from a distance. The moment we think from the desired state rather than of it, the state becomes overpoweringly real. As long as we only think of it, it remains a mere possibility, interesting, but remote. The moment we think from it, it becomes the ground we stand on. And from that ground, everything naturally unfolds. That night, and for several nights following, I fell asleep in the assumption that I was in my father's house in Barbados, not imagining myself flying there, not planning how I might get there, simply inhabiting the feeling of already being there. The sounds, the warmth, the particular quality of the air, the sense of belonging to that place. I occupied the state as fully and as vividly as I could each night until sleep carried me from it. Within a month, I received a letter from my brother. He said that he felt a strong and unexpected desire to have the entire family together at Christmas, and he enclosed a steamship ticket for my passage to Barbados. I sailed 2 days after receiving his letter and spent a remarkable winter there. Notice what did not happen. I did not earn the money for a ticket through extra work. I did not find a benefactor through networking. I did not solve the problem at the level of the problem. I changed my state of consciousness, and the state drew to itself, through my brother's spontaneous and seemingly independent impulse, exactly the means required for its own realization. My brother did not know he was an instrument of my imagination. He only knew that he wanted his family together. But that wanting was not random. It was the response of the outer world to the state I had inwardly occupied. This experience convinced me that a person can become anything they sincerely desire to become if they will make the imagined state habitual and learn to think from the end rather than toward it. It also dissolved once and for all my ability to excuse my circumstances by pointing to external causes. My good and my evil do not depend upon what the world does or fails to do. They depend upon the state from which I view the world. Man, who is free in his choosing, acts from the conceptions of himself and the world that he has freely, though not always wisely, selected and maintained. All conceivable states are permanently available, waiting only for someone to enter and occupy them. But no amount of reasoning, analyzing, or strategizing will of itself deliver a person into the state of consciousness that is the only thing truly worth having. Only imagination can do that. And imagination does it through the imaginative image, the felt sense of the state already occupied, the wish already fulfilled. The ultimate purpose of imagination is to create within us the spirit of continual forgiveness, the ongoing, active identification of every person we encounter, including ourselves, with their highest ideal and their deepest aim. Only by persistently identifying ourselves with our aim can we forgive ourselves for having missed it. Everything else is, in the deepest analysis, secondary labor. The imagination that moves into and remains within the state of the fulfilled desire is the one creative act from which all other effective action flows, on whatever path imagination carries us, and into whatever state or place we inevitably gravitate physically as well. The inner movement precedes and determines the outer. The assumption precedes and produces the fact. The bridge between desire and satisfaction, between thinking of the end and thinking from the end, is all important. Reason, by its nature, is confined to the evidence already present to the senses. It cannot cross this bridge because the bridge itself requires moving beyond the evidence of the present into the felt reality of the desired state. Imagination has no such limitation. Imagination can take up residence in any state regardless of what the senses currently report. And it is precisely this freedom, this absolute sovereignty of imagination over the boundaries imposed by present circumstances, that makes it the one and only creative power. Desire exists in order to be satisfied through the activity of imagination. Through imagination, the person escapes the limitation of the senses and the constricting bondage of purely rational analysis. There is no obstacle that can permanently halt the person who has learned to think from the end. Nothing in the outer world can ultimately stop them. They do not force their way through walls. They dissolve the walls by moving, in imagination, to the other side of them. And the walls, having lost their correspondence with the inner state, cease to function as barriers. It does not matter what a person has been or what they are in this moment. All that matters is what they want and whether they are willing to occupy the state of already having it with enough consistency, enough genuine feeling, enough imaginative commitment that the outer world has no choice but to reorganize itself in correspondence with what has already been established within. Write 888 I already live in my answered prayer in the comments below. Let this community see the moment you chose to think from the end rather than toward it. There is one more dimension of this principle that deserves to be stated plainly before we move forward, because it is the dimension most easily misunderstood by the person encountering these ideas for the first time. Thinking from the end does not mean pretending. It does not mean performing a state you do not feel. It does not mean forcing yourself to feel satisfied about circumstances that are genuinely painful, or to deny the evidence of a difficulty that is real and present. That kind of forced positivity is not imagination. It is suppression, and it accomplishes nothing creative. Thinking from the end means something more precise and more powerful than any of that. It means identifying the specific state of consciousness that would be naturally yours if the desired condition were already a fact, and then, in deliberate acts of imagination, inhabiting that state with as much genuine feeling as you can access. Not performing the feeling, not manufacturing it artificially, accessing it. The way an actor genuinely accesses emotion by imaginatively placing themselves in the circumstances of the character, not by pretending to feel something they do not feel, but by imaginatively becoming someone who genuinely feels it. This is why the work of falling asleep in the assumption matters so deeply. In the threshold state between waking and sleep, the critical faculty of the rational mind relaxes. The guard that stands between the conscious and the deeper levels of consciousness lowers, and in that receptive state, the images and feelings you have chosen to inhabit are accepted with a depth and a completeness that ordinary waking consciousness rarely achieves. This is why Abdullah emphasized the importance of the state from which a person falls asleep. It is the most potent moment of imaginative access available in the daily cycle of human experience. Use it deliberately. Use it consistently. Use it for the specific, chosen imaginal scene that represents your desire already fulfilled. And let the law of correspondence do the rest. The outer world will follow. It always follows. It has never done anything else. And the children struggled within her, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. Genesis 25:22, 23. Duality is not a flaw in the design of human existence. It is the design itself. Everything that genuinely exists is doubled. Man is a dual being with contrary principles woven into the very fabric of his nature. These 2 principles are not in accidental conflict. Their struggle is deliberate, purposeful, and ultimately redemptive. It is what Scripture calls the war in heaven, the never-ending contest between the younger or inner man of imagination and the elder or outer man of sense. And in this contest, imagination is destined to prevail, not by force, by nature. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Matthew 19:30. The second man is the Lord from heaven. 1 Corinthians 15:47. Man begins to awaken to the imaginative life the precise moment he begins to feel the presence of this other being within himself. The sense that there is something in you that is not confined by your present circumstances, something that knows more than your history would suggest you could know, that reaches further than your conditions would suggest you could reach. That sensation is the stirring of the inner man. It is imagination beginning to become conscious of itself within you. There are 2 absolutely distinct centers of thought within every human being, 2 entirely separate outlooks on the world. The Bible refers to these as the natural and the spiritual. The natural outlook is the one that receives its information exclusively from the physical senses and interprets that information according to patterns established by previous experience. The spiritual outlook is the one that perceives from imagination, from the inner world of creative consciousness, and that understands the outer world as effect rather than cause. The natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. 1 Corinthians 2:14. Man's inner body is as completely and genuinely real in the domain of subjective experience as his outer physical body is real in the domain of external appearances. But the inner body expresses a more fundamental dimension of reality, the causal dimension, the level at which things are created before they become visible. This inner body, this imaginative self, must be consciously exercised. It must be deliberately and skillfully directed. Left to operate without conscious guidance, it defaults to the patterns installed by habit, repetition, and unexamined belief. There are two categories of movement in human experience: movement that originates in the inner body, in imagination, is causal movement. It is free. It is self-initiated. It is the source. Movement that occurs in the outer physical body is movement under compulsion. It responds to and follows the inner movement that preceded it. The inner movement determines and shapes the outer. Whenever the actions of the inner body match the actions that the outer body would need to take in order to satisfy a desire, that desire will be realized. The inner correspondence is what matters. The outer correspondence follows automatically. This is not a metaphor. This is a precise description of the mechanics of creation as they operate in human experience. The movement of every visible external event is caused not by forces operating from the outside, but by activity operating from within, working outward from the inner world of imagination into the outer world of appearances. Construct in your imagination a scene that implies your desire is fulfilled. Make it a scene that involves movement, specifically movement of yourself, not your physical body sitting still and watching a mental movie. Your inner body, your imaginal self, actively moving through a scene that could only exist if your desire were already a reality. Then, as you approach sleep, carry that scene into the threshold state and inhabit it there. A short period of genuine, imaginative inhabitation, even a nap, even a brief excursion into the inner world, is sufficient. But the carrying of the action into sleep thickens what is still imaginative fancy into what will become physical fact. At first, your attention will wander, your thoughts will scatter. You will begin the inner scene and find yourself, moments later, thinking about something entirely unrelated. Do not be discouraged by this. Bring your attention back. Bring it back again and again, as many times as necessary. With patient, persistent, unemotional consistency, the attention learns to follow the appointed path. The inner journey must never be without direction. When you enter the inner world, you go for the specific outcome you have already identified. You do not wander there. You travel there with purpose, to the prize you have already seen and chosen. Now let me give you a demonstration of this principle drawn from actual experience, the kind of demonstration that the rational mind, confronted with it, cannot simply wave away. A young woman who was completely blind was living in the city of San Francisco. A rerouting of the public bus lines had transformed her daily commute from a manageable 15 minutes into an ordeal of 2 hours and 15 minutes, requiring 3 separate transfers. She had no driver. She could not drive herself. By every external measurement, the situation was a genuine and seemingly intractable problem. She chose a different path. She thought seriously about what she actually needed. Not what seemed available, but what would genuinely resolve the situation. A car. Not to drive herself, but to be driven in one. She had no car. She had no driver. She had nothing except her imagination and her understanding of how to use it. She sat quietly in her living room and began to construct the inner scene. She felt herself seated inside a car. She felt the particular rhythm of the engine beneath her. She imagined the scent of the interior, the subtle vibration of movement, the texture of the seat beneath her. She felt herself reaching out and touching the sleeve of the person beside her, and she felt intuitively that the driver was a man. She felt the car come to a stop, turned toward her companion, and said aloud in her imagination, "Thank you very much, sir." And she heard his response, "The pleasure is all mine." Then she stepped out of the car and heard the door close firmly behind her. She did not think of the ride as something she wished she could have. She thought from the ride as something she was already experiencing. She viewed the city, through imagination, from within the moving car. She centered her attention entirely within the state of the wish already fulfilled, and she sustained that centering with full sensory vividness and emotional reality. On 2 successive days, she gave herself this imaginal ride, each time with the complete joy, the full sensory presence, the undiluted emotion of actual experience. She did not merely picture it, she inhabited it. A few hours after her second imaginal ride, a friend mentioned to her a story in the evening newspaper, a story about a man who was known for his interest in supporting people who were blind. She called him and described her situation. The following day, that man stopped at a bar on his way home and, feeling an inexplicable impulse, found himself telling the story of the blind young woman to the proprietor. A complete stranger, that stranger, upon hearing the story, immediately volunteered to drive her home from work every day. The man who had told the story then said, "If you will take her home each evening, I will take her to work each morning." From that day forward, over a year at the time of this telling, that blind woman has been driven to and from her office by these 2 men. What had been 2 hours and 15 minutes on 3 buses became less than 15 minutes in a car. And on that first ride to her office, she turned to the man driving her and said exactly the words she had rehearsed in imagination. "Thank you very much, sir." And he replied, as she had heard, in imagination, "The pleasure is all mine." The objects of her imagination were to her the realities of which the physical events were only the confirmation. She had not hoped. She had not wished. She had not asked or applied or negotiated. She had imagined from within the state, with the full weight and vividness of felt reality, and the outer world had organized itself to match what she had already inhabited inwardly. Comment 444. I move inward, and the outer world follows in the comments right now. Let the community witness your understanding of this law. This is the law beneath all outer appearances. Inner movement produces corresponding outer movement, without exception. The person who practices this, who learns to construct the inner drama with precision and inhabit it with genuine feeling, will develop capacities of concentration and inner stillness that are extraordinary by ordinary standards, and they will, with increasing consistency and reliability, watch the outer world shape itself in correspondence with what they have already created within. Notice what the blind woman did not do. She did not think about how the problem might be solved. She did not analyze the available options. She did not draft a plan or consult a strategy. She created the inner reality of the problem already resolved and lived from within that reality until it externalized itself. This is the essence of practical imagination, not fantasy, not wishful projection. Precise, deliberate, feeling-soaked inhabitation of the state already desired. From within that state, sustained until the outer world catches up with the inner. She is not exceptional in any spiritual sense that distinguishes her from any other person. What distinguishes her story is not her capacity, it is her application. She understood the law. She applied it with full sensory commitment. She sustained it across 2 days without requiring immediate evidence of its working. And the outer world, operating by the only law it knows, the law of correspondence with the inner, delivered exactly what she had inwardly lived. This is available to every person reading or hearing these words, not as a distant aspiration, but as an immediately applicable, immediately testable, immediately verifiable truth. Think about a desire in your own life right now, something specific, something that matters to you enough that you have thought about it more than once. Now ask yourself, have you ever fully inhabited the state of that desire already fulfilled? Not thought about it, not visualized it from the outside as an observer watching a pleasing scene through glass, but stepped inside the scene, felt the floor beneath your feet, sensed the atmosphere of the environment, heard the natural sounds of that moment, felt the emotion that would be naturally yours in that situation, and lived there from within as though it were already real? If you have done this genuinely, even once, you have felt something shift, a subtle but unmistakable sense of something settling into place, a rightness, a recognition, a quality of inner certainty that has nothing to do with the outer evidence and everything to do with the state you have just temporarily occupied. That shift is not imagination in the casual sense. That is imagination in the creative, operative, causative sense. That is the law activating. That is the seed going into the ground. And, with consistent watering, with regular, deliberate, feeling-soaked return to that state, the harvest will come. The inner journey is always in yourself. You travel along the highways of the inner world without inner movement, without the prior imaginal inhabitation of the desired state. Nothing new can be brought forth in the outer world. Inner action is, in its deepest form, introverted sensation. It is the full, felt experience of the outer world as it would present itself if the desire were already a reality, but experienced from within, before the outer world has yet reorganized itself to match. Construct, mentally, the drama that implies your desire is already realized. Close your eyes, release the surface tension of conscious thought. Center your imagination entirely within the predetermined scene, within the action that belongs naturally to the state of fulfillment, and partake in that action, not as a viewer watching it from outside, but as the person living it from within. In doing so, you become genuinely self-determined. You become the conscious author of your own experience rather than the unconscious recipient of conditions you did not deliberately choose. Ideas only act when they are felt. Thought without feeling has no creative power. It is the marriage of imaginal scene and genuine emotional response that fires the inner machinery of creation. Inner movement is initiated by self-motivation, by the genuine felt desire for the state imagined. Outer movement follows as the natural consequence. Wherever the sole of your foot shall tread, the same give I unto you. Joshua 1-3. Wherever imagination genuinely places you, wherever the inner self truly dwells, the outer life must eventually conform. This is not wishful thinking. This is the precise, consistent, unwavering law of the relationship between imagination and experience. Now consider the implications of this for your own life. Right now, not as a future practice to begin someday when conditions are more convenient. Right now, what state are you currently inhabiting in your imagination? What scene, what assumption, what felt reality have you been most consistently living from? Not aspiring toward, but actually living from as the background assumption from which you view everything else. Because that state, whatever it is the creative ground from which your present circumstances are flowing. And if you want different circumstances, the path is not to fight harder against the present ones. The path is to change the state from which you are operating, to construct the new inner scene, to inhabit the new imaginative reality, to think and feel and perceive from within the state of the desired end, and to hold that state with the consistency and fidelity that transforms it from an occasional mental exercise into a genuinely new home for consciousness. There is an important distinction to understand between what might be called fancy and imagination. Fancy assembles. It collects images and ideas and places them next to one another, like furniture arranged in a room. Imagination fuses. It merges the observer with the observed, the imaginer with the imagined, the self with the state desired. Until the distinction between what is imagined and what is real collapses, until the inner scene has the full tone, weight, and felt reality of actual experience. It is this fusion, this complete merging of consciousness with the desired state, that charges the imaginal act with creative power. Less than this is mere pleasant daydreaming. More than this is the conscious exercise of the one force by which reality is made. The inner self moves along its predetermined course most powerfully when the emotions are fully engaged and aligned with the scene. Not manufactured emotion, not forced feeling pasted onto a scene that does not yet feel real. Genuine emotional response arising naturally from a scene that has been constructed with sufficient vividness and specificity that the feeling arises on its own, the way it does when something genuinely and deeply desired suddenly appears to become real. We must take pleasure in the inner action. We must allow ourselves to feel the joy, the relief, the satisfaction, the gratitude that belongs naturally to the state of the wish already fulfilled. This is not self-deception. This is how creation works. Joy is not a reward that comes after the manifestation. It is the fuel that drives the manifestation. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is not the effect of having received. It is the cause of receiving. The second man is the Lord from heaven. 1 Corinthians 15:47. There is a practice available to every human being, requiring no external tools, no special credentials, no financial resources, no particular gift or talent. That is, when applied consistently and with genuine intention, one of the most quietly revolutionary forces available to the human mind. It is the practice of revision, and it is likely not what you first imagine when you hear that word. Most people, when they think of revising something, think of editing a document, correcting errors, improving phrasing, tightening structure. The revision I am speaking of is a revision of experience itself, of reality, of what has already happened, not by pretending it did not happen, not by denial or suppression, but by the precise imaginative act of reliving an experience in your imagination with full sensory and emotional vividness, as it should have been lived, rather than as it was. The very first act of genuine healing, the first act of authentic correction, is always to revise. And one must always begin with oneself. It is one's own state, one's own inner condition, that must be transformed. What we are, that only can we see. Emerson. Here is what this looks like in practice. Suppose that today brought disappointing news. A letter arrived with contents that deflated you, that seemed to close a door you had been hoping would open. The practice of revision says this: take that letter in your imagination, rewrite it, not on paper, in your mind. See the envelope again, open it again, and this time read the letter that you wish you had received. Read the words of good news, of affirmation, of confirmation. Read them with full emotional engagement. Feel what it would feel like to receive that news. And then read the revised letter again and again. Let the imagined version become more real to you than the actual one. This is not escapism. This is not avoidance. This is the application of the understanding that imagination is causative, that the inner experience precedes and produces the outer one, to the specific domain of things that have already appeared to go wrong. The revision does not merely make you feel better about a bad situation. It changes the inner state from which your future experience will flow. It alters the causal ground. And in altering the causal ground, it alters what grows from it. The one essential requirement is that you genuinely absorb yourself in the revised scene, that you bring your full attention and your full feeling into the imaginative re-experience of the event as it should have unfolded. The depth of your absorption is the measure of the revision's effectiveness. A revision performed casually, with part of the mind still occupied by the actual event, will not have the same transformative power as one performed with total, single-pointed, imaginative engagement. Every time you genuinely revise an experience, every time you genuinely relive it as it should have been, you are, in the deepest mystical sense, born again. The old version of you that experienced the disappointing or painful event is dissolved. A new version arises that experienced the corrected, healed, ideal version. And from that new inner ground, a new outer world naturally grows. Forgiveness, understood correctly, is not an act of moral generosity towards someone who has wronged you. It is the creative, imaginative act of releasing yourself and them from the prison of the actual event by substituting for it in your inner experience the event as it should have been. Every time you do this, every time you genuinely forgive in this operative, imaginative sense, you experience what might be called a personal Easter, a rising, a transformation, a death and resurrection accomplished not through suffering, but through the precise, deliberate, conscious exercise of imagination. Freedom and the capacity for forgiveness are inseparably linked. To be unable to forgive, to be locked in the literal version of what happened, is to be at war with oneself, because the outer world will continue to reflect the inner state of the unrevised event for as long as that event remains unrevised within consciousness. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Luke 6:37. The moment a person genuinely begins to practice revision, not as an occasional experiment, but as a daily discipline, a non-negotiable part of the way they conduct their inner life, something begins to shift in the very texture of their experience. The outer world does not change immediately. The people around them do not suddenly transform overnight. What changes first is subtler and more profound. The person's relationship to the outer world begins to alter. Where they once saw fixed conditions, they begin to perceive mutable projections. Where they once saw inevitable facts, they begin to recognize the crystallized echoes of old imaginative states. And this perceptual shift, this change in how reality presents itself to the revising, awakened consciousness, is the beginning of genuine liberation. It is important to understand that revision is not a technique for denying discomfort or pretending that painful events did not occur. What the revising person refuses to do is accept any condition as final, as fixed, as beyond the reach of imaginative power. Revision is not the coding of difficult facts with pleasant feelings. It is the imaginative reconstruction of experience at its causal level, the rewriting of the inner script from which outer events are drawn, carried out with full honesty about what has appeared in the outer world, and with full conviction about the power of imagination to alter what the outer world will produce next. Here is the experience of an artist whose account demonstrates, in a way that no amount of theoretical argument can match, exactly how revision operates and what it produces. On a Thursday, she had taught through the full day at an art school. Near the end of the afternoon, entering her classroom, she discovered that the janitor had left all the chairs stacked on top of the desks after cleaning the floor. As she lifted one of the chairs down, it slipped from her hands and struck her foot with a sharp, sudden blow. She looked down immediately. Her skin and her stocking were both intact. She examined her thoughts and found that she had, in that moment, been critical of the janitor for not having done his work completely. She recognized the criticism, released it, and moved on through the remainder of the day, apparently untroubled. That evening, after 3 hours of concentrated work at her drawing table, she rose to make herself a cup of coffee and discovered, to her complete shock, that she could not use her right foot. The pain was intense and escalating. She sat down, removed her slipper, and saw that her entire foot was discolored, swollen badly, and radiating heat. The pain was real. The physical evidence was unmistakable. She did what she had been trained to do. She became quiet. She prepared inwardly to revise the experience. And then something unexpected happened. Her imagination said simply and quietly, "No, not yet." She found herself arguing with this inner direction, telling it that she was in genuine pain, that she was trying not to panic, that she needed help. The answer came again. Go to bed and review the day. She did. Moving carefully to her bed, arranging the covers so they would not press against her injured foot, she began to move through the day in her imagination, revisiting each scene, gently, looking for anything that needed to be healed. She worked through the chair incident again. She found it already resolved in her mind. She moved forward through the day, and then she arrived at a moment she had not consciously connected to her foot at all. Earlier in the evening, she had passed a man she had known since her school years, someone who, for the past year, had made a deliberate point of not acknowledging her when they crossed paths. She had tried, and he had not responded. In revisiting this scene in imagination, she stopped. She did not accept the actual version. She revised it. In her inner world, she said hello, and this time he looked up, smiled, and said hello in return. She felt warmly toward him. She ran the revised scene through her imagination 2 or 3 times until the feeling of warmth and connection was genuine and complete. Then she moved on through the rest of the day. She fell asleep during her revision practice. The next morning, as she reached for her slipper, she had a sudden, vivid inner image, a momentary flash of recollection of a discolored and swollen foot. She looked down at her actual foot. It was completely normal, perfect in every detail. A small pink mark on the instep where the chair had struck her. Nothing more. No swelling, no discoloration, no pain. The injury that had been physically undeniable 8 hours earlier had vanished entirely. She had won, through the art of revision, what no amount of direct physical effort could have achieved. The inner correction had produced an outer healing. The revised state of consciousness had projected a revised physical reality. In heaven, the only art of living is forgetting and forgiving. Blake. Now we arrive at what may be the most intimate and most frequently overlooked dimension of imaginative power: your inner speech. The conversation you are conducting with yourself right now, beneath the surface of your conscious attention, is the most active creative force in your daily life. More than your plans, more than your efforts, more than your strategies or your skills or your resources. The inner conversation, the perpetual monologue that runs through consciousness, from the moment of waking to the moment of sleep, is continuously writing the script of your experience and casting the characters who will appear in it. In the beginning was the Word. John 1:1. By inner speech is meant those mental conversations that you carry on with yourself throughout every waking hour, whether clearly audible or operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. You are their author, and you are fashioning your world in their likeness. You are literally speaking your life into existence, not through the words you say aloud, but through the words you say within. Observe your inner speech right now if you can. What is it saying? What assumptions does it reveal about you, about what you are capable of, about what you deserve, about what the people around you think of you, about what is or is not possible for you, because it reflects your inner state with absolute precision. And because inner speech objectifies itself, because it cannot remain merely subjective, but must express itself as outer experience. Whatever your inner conversation says, your outer life eventually confirms. The art, and it is a genuine art, requiring practice and consistent effort, is to construct an inner conversation that matches the outer conversation you would naturally be having if your desire were already realized. What would you be saying to yourself if the thing you most desire were already a fact in your life? What would be the natural tone, the natural assumptions, the natural background commentary of your inner voice if you were already living from the state of fulfillment? Begin to say those things inwardly. Practice them. Repeat them. Not as affirmations disconnected from genuine feeling, but as the natural expression of a state you are imaginatively inhabiting. Drop 333. I revise, I release, I rise in the comments below. Let this community mark the moment you chose a new inner conversation and a new inner life. There is a moment in a person's experience of these principles, and if you have been genuinely present to this transmission, you may have already felt it, when an idea ceases to be an idea and becomes a recognition. When something you are hearing resonates, not merely with your intellectual understanding, but with something older and deeper within you, something that has always known this but had forgotten. That resonance is not accidental. It is imagination recognizing itself. Every stage of genuine progress in a person's life is made through the conscious exercise of imagination matching inner speech to fulfilled desire. When imagination and inner speech are brought into genuine, sustained alignment, when the inner conversation matches what the outer conversation would naturally be if the desire were already a living fact, then the creative power is unified. It flows without obstruction. It accumulates momentum. It becomes a creative tide that no outer circumstance can permanently resist. Consider for a moment how much of your daily inner speech is reactive. How much of it is a running commentary on what the outer world is presenting, rather than a deliberate declaration of the state you have chosen to inhabit. Most people discover, when they first begin to genuinely observe their inner conversation, that it is almost entirely reactive. It responds to circumstances rather than creating them. It narrates what is rather than establishing what will be. It is the voice of the outer man of sense, faithful in its reporting, utterly unconscious of its creative power, and therefore perpetually confirming and reinforcing the very conditions it is describing. The shift from reactive inner speech to creative inner speech is not accomplished in a single moment of resolution. It is a practice, a discipline that must be applied with patience and consistency across days and weeks and months until the new inner conversation becomes as natural and as automatic as the old one. This is what Paul meant when he wrote of putting off the old man and putting on the new. The old man is the habitual, reactive inner conversation that confirms the world as it appears. The new man is the deliberate, creative inner conversation that speaks from within the state of fulfilled desire and thereby causes the outer world to reorganize itself in correspondence. You will not always succeed. There will be days when the old inner speech reasserts itself with such force and such familiarity that you find yourself, almost before you noticed it happening, back inside the old state, narrating the old story, confirming the old conditions. This is not failure. This is the nature of the work. The response to those moments is not self-judgment or discouragement. The response is the same as the response to the attention wandering during an imaginal exercise. Bring it back, gently, without drama, without the compounding of failure upon failure by adding self-criticism to the drift. Simply observe the drift, choose again, and return to the new inner conversation from which you intend to build your life. On a morning in April of 1953, my wife was awakened from sleep by the sound of what she described as a great voice of authority speaking clearly within her. The message was precise and complete. You must stop spending your thoughts, your time, and your energy. Everything in life must be an investment. To spend is to lay out without expectation of return. To invest is to commit a resource toward a specific chosen outcome with the full expectation of a corresponding return. The difference between the two, in the domain of thought and imagination, is the entire difference between a life of reactive circumstance and a life of conscious creation. Every moment of inner speech is either an investment or an expenditure. When you give inner speech to images and assumptions and felt realities that correspond to the life you desire to live, you are investing. When you give inner speech to complaints, fears, doubts, and the habitual narration of conditions you wish would change, you are spending on exactly the conditions you most want to be free from. The present moment, always, without exception, is the right moment for investment. Not after you have had more time to prepare. Not once you understand these principles more completely. Now. The investment is made now, in the inner speech and inner feeling of this present moment. And the return will appear in the outer world as the circumstances and conditions that correspond to the state in which the investment was made. Creation is finished. Every state you could ever desire to experience, every condition of abundance, of love, of creative fulfillment, of genuine freedom, of health and wholeness already exists, not as a future possibility that must be labored into being from the raw material of the present, as a completed reality already fully formed in the infinite field of consciousness, waiting only for you to match its inner requirements, to fuse with it in imagination, to enter and occupy it, and thereby to activate it, to bring it from the realm of mere possibility into the realm of lived, breathing, undeniable fact. You are not limited. You have never been limited. The limitations you have experienced have been the precise and faithful projections of the limitations you have imagined, and they will dissolve with the same precision and faithfulness the moment the imagination that produced them has been genuinely and consistently redirected toward the life that is your actual inheritance. Hold fast to your ideal. Do not abandon it. in the face of contrary outer appearances. The outer appearances are the echo of past imagination. They are not prophetic of your future. Your future is determined by what you are imagining now, from what state you are now perceiving and speaking and feeling inwardly. Feed your imagination only the best. Give it only those images and assumptions and inner conversations that correspond to the life you genuinely desire to live. Before you return to the ordinary rhythms of your day, take one deliberate moment to remain with what you have just received, not to analyze it or debate it or compare it with other things you have read or heard. Simply let it settle. Allow it to find the place within you where it already resonates, where some part of you has been waiting to hear these exact words spoken aloud with the full weight of their meaning. The principles are yours. The practice is yours. The imagination is yours. All that remains is the consistent, courageous, daily choice to use it deliberately, consciously, with the full conviction that you are not merely thinking pleasant thoughts about a better life, but operating the only creative power that exists in the direction of the life you are choosing to build. Start tonight. Revise the day before you sleep. Inhabit the wish already fulfilled as you cross the threshold into sleep. Wake tomorrow in the expectation of its confirmation, and keep going. The law does not fail. The imagination does not lie. What you genuinely become in the inner world, you will inevitably encounter in the outer one. You are not waiting for permission. You are not waiting for better circumstances or more resources or a more convenient moment. The kingdom of heaven is within you. It is within you now, in this moment, exactly as you are. The moment you turn the eye of attention inward, the moment you locate yourself not in the evidence of the outer world, but in the creative sovereignty of your own awakened imagination, the door opens, and what comes through it will astonish you. This is not the end. This is the awakening. Welcome to Elite Success Audiobooks, and welcome to the life that your imagination, your Christ, your creative power, your divine inheritance has always been waiting to build for you. Drop 1111. I am awakened. I am the living architect of my own reality in the comments right now. Let this entire community see the moment you chose to stop sleeping and start creating. Let this be the moment everything changes. This recording is a production of Elite Success Audiobooks. Thank you for listening to Awakened Imagination by Neville Goddard. Please subscribe to Elite Success Audiobooks to receive notifications of all upcoming recordings. There is something that must be said plainly before this transmission closes, something that is often left unsaid in presentations of these ideas, perhaps because it requires a kind of honesty that is uncomfortable, or perhaps because it seems to contradict the simplicity and elegance of the principle itself. But it must be said because without it, these teachings can become yet another collection of ideas that are admired without ever being genuinely applied. The practice is simple. The discipline is demanding. There is no contradiction in these two statements. The principle of awakened imagination is as clean and as direct as any truth ever articulated. Occupy the state of your fulfilled desire in imagination, sustain it with genuine feeling, and the outer world must reorganize itself to correspond. That is the principle. It is simple. What is demanding is the daily, consistent, unrelenting application of it in the face of a world that is perpetually presenting evidence to the contrary. Every morning you wake up, the outer world will present itself exactly as it was when you went to sleep. The circumstances have not yet changed. The people in your life are not yet behaving differently. The bank account is not yet reflecting what you have been imagining. The relationship is not yet showing the evidence of the revision you performed last night. And in that gap, the gap between what you have imagined and what the outer world is currently showing you, is the entire test of your understanding of this principle. The uninitiated person confronting that gap concludes that the method has failed. They think, I imagined, I felt, I revised, and nothing changed. And so they stop. They return to the habitual, reactive, unconscious imagination that produced the conditions they were trying to escape. And of course the conditions remain. Of course they persist. Of course they even seem to intensify, because the withdrawal of the new imaginative state has left the old one in full possession of the field. The person who genuinely understands the principle knows something different. They know that the gap is not evidence of failure. The gap is the interval between cause and effect, the natural, inevitable, and actually quite brief period between the planting of the imaginative seed and the appearance of the harvest. Every farmer understands that you do not dig up the seed 3 days after planting to check whether it has failed. You water it, you tend the soil, you trust the process, and you prepare with complete confidence for the harvest that the law of the season guarantees. Imagination operates by the same law. Plant the imagined state with genuine feeling. Tend it daily, through revision, through inner speech aligned with fulfillment, through the nightly assumption of the wish already realized, and trust. Not the passive, resigned trust of someone who has handed the outcome over to forces beyond their understanding. The active, engaged, knowing trust of someone who understands exactly how the creative process works and who has chosen to cooperate with it consciously, consistently, and without wavering. But one thing I do, forgetting the things which are behind and stretching forward to the things which are before, I press on toward the goal. Philippians 3:13. This is the posture of the awakened imagination. Not looking backward at what has been, not looking sideways at what the outer world is currently showing, but pressing forward, imaginatively, feelingly, daily, toward the state already chosen and already occupied in the inner world. Forgetting is not denial. Forgetting is the refusal to continue investing imaginative energy in the old state, the withdrawal of creative attention from conditions you no longer consent to as your reality. You cannot simultaneously inhabit the new state and dwell imaginatively in the old one. The choice must be made, and it must be remade daily in the small moments of ordinary life when the old familiar inner conversation tries to reassert itself. Every person reading or hearing these words carries within them a desire that has not yet been realized, something they deeply want for their health, their relationships, their creative work, their financial condition, their sense of purpose and contribution. And every one of those desires is a call from the imagination to enter a state that already exists, that is already fully formed and fully real in the infinite field of creative consciousness, and that requires only their imaginative inhabitation to be activated and drawn into physical expression. The question is never whether the desired state exists. It does. The question is never whether the law works. It does, without exception, always, for everyone who applies it. The only question that has ever mattered, is whether you will apply it, whether you will take the principle from the realm of interesting ideas into the realm of daily, consistent, feeling-soaked, imaginative practice, whether you will revise tonight, whether you will fall asleep in the assumption tomorrow night, whether you will catch the old inner speech and replace it with the new one, again and again, with patience and without self-judgment. For as long as it takes for the new inner conversation to become the natural, default expression of a consciousness that has genuinely moved into a new state, the state is already there. The law is already operating. The only variable is you, the conscious, creative, sovereign operator of the imagination that is the Christ within you. Choose, and then keep choosing, daily, without exception. That is the practice. That is the awakened life. There are those who will hear all of this and feel, somewhere beneath the surface of their understanding, that it is true, and will nonetheless return to the old patterns within days or weeks of this encounter, not because the principle failed, because the pull of the familiar is powerful, and the imagination, if not consciously directed, defaults to habit. This is why revision is not optional. This is why the daily review of the day, the nightly correction of what did not conform to the ideal, is not a supplementary practice for the particularly dedicated. It is the core maintenance of the awakened life. Without it, the new imaginative states erode. Without it, the old ones reassert themselves. With it, the new inner ground becomes progressively more stable, progressively more natural, progressively more the genuine and uncontested home of consciousness. Awake, thou that sleepest. The command is not a suggestion. It is not an invitation extended to the particularly spiritually inclined. It is the call of the deepest truth about human nature to every human being who has ever lived. The call to stop sleepwalking through a life constructed by unconscious imagination and to take conscious, deliberate, creative possession of the one power that has always been available and has always been operating and has always been producing the results of whatever state consciousness happened to be fused with in any given moment. Wake up to what you are. Wake up to what imagination is. Wake up to what is available to you right now in this very moment, exactly as you are, with exactly what you currently have in exactly the circumstances you currently inhabit. None of that needs to change before the practice begins. The practice begins first, and the circumstances, in their own time and through means that will often surprise you completely, will follow. There is something worth saying about the nature of this surprise, the surprise that almost every person experiences when they first begin to see the outer world genuinely responding to their inner work, because the response rarely comes in the way the person expected. The Barbados ticket did not arrive because I found a way to earn enough money for it. It arrived through my brother's spontaneous desire to reunite the family. The blind woman's transportation did not appear because she found an accessible transit option or a formal assistance program. It appeared through a stranger overhearing a story in a bar and making a spontaneous decision to help. The artist's foot was not healed through medical treatment applied to the physical injury. It was healed through the revision of an entirely unrelated social encounter from earlier in the day. This is one of the most consistent and most remarkable features of how imagination works. The means by which the desired state manifests are almost never the means the rational mind would have chosen or predicted. They come from unexpected directions, through unexpected people, through coincidences that seem too precise to be accidental, and yet carry no fingerprints of conscious design. This is not because imagination works mysteriously or arbitrarily. It is because imagination works by correspondence, by matching the inner state to whatever elements of the outer world can be recruited to express that state. And the outer world contains an infinite number of pathways toward any given destination, most of which the rational mind would never have considered. This is why trust is not a luxury in this practice. It is a requirement. The person who occupies the imaginal state and then attempts to micromanage the means by which it will manifest is undermining the very process they are trying to employ. The means are not your responsibility. Occupying the state is your responsibility. Speaking from within the state is your responsibility. Revising daily toward the state is your responsibility. The means, the specific, often surprising, sometimes astonishing chain of outer events through which the state will externalize itself. Those belong to the intelligence of imagination itself, which operates across a wider field of possibility than any individual rational mind can survey. In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. John 14:2. The place is being prepared right now in the infinite field of already existing states that await only your genuine imaginative occupancy to be activated and drawn into your physical experience. The preparation is not something that happens outside of you, in some distant spiritual realm that you must wait to access. The preparation is what happens every time you genuinely enter the state of the wish fulfilled, every time you fall asleep in the assumption, every time you revise the day, every time you correct the inner speech and speak from within the desired end. Each of those acts is the preparation, and the coming, the manifestation, will follow as surely as effect follows cause, as surely as harvest follows seed, as surely as light follows the opening of a door. You are not small. You are not limited by what your history appears to suggest about you. You are not confined to the life that your present circumstances seem to indicate is available to you. You are the imagination that created those circumstances, and you are the imagination that can create different ones, not by escaping from your life into pleasant mental imagery, by taking full, conscious, creative possession of the inner ground from which your life is continually being assembled, and choosing, with increasing skill and increasing commitment, to assemble it according to the vision of what you most deeply and genuinely desire. Every person who has ever lived a life of genuine creative freedom, who has managed to move from conditions of severe limitation to conditions of remarkable abundance, from isolation to deep connection, from creative paralysis to prolific expression, has done so through some version of this principle. Some knew it explicitly and applied it deliberately. Many more knew it implicitly and applied it without fully understanding what they were doing. But in every case, the mechanism was the same. A state was occupied in consciousness before it appeared in circumstance. An assumption was held before it hardened into fact. An inner conversation was changed before the outer world changed in correspondence. You now know the mechanism. You now understand, with a clarity and a precision that most people never achieve, exactly how the creative power within you operates and exactly what it requires of you in order to produce the life you are choosing to live. The question that remains, the only question that has ever mattered, is what you will do with this understanding, whether you will carry it with you as a beautiful idea that enriched a few hours of listening, or whether you will take it into your daily life as the operating principle from which you will now consistently, deliberately, and faithfully build. The answer to that question is, of course, entirely yours. No, one can choose it for you. No teaching, no teacher, no transmission, however precise or powerful, can make the choice for you. What a teaching can do is what this one has attempted to do. Give you the clearest, most direct, most practically actionable account of the principle available, so that when you do choose to apply it, you know exactly what you are doing and why it works. The rest is yours. The imagination is yours. The Christ within you is yours. The inheritance is yours. Go and build the life that has always been waiting. This is awakened imagination. This is your inheritance. This is who you are. Drop 1111. I am awakened. I am the living architect of my own reality in the comments right now. Let this entire community see the moment you chose to stop sleeping and start creating. Let this be the moment everything changes. This recording is a production of Elite Success Audiobooks. Thank you for listening to Awakened Imagination by Neville Goddard. Please subscribe to Elite Success Audiobooks to receive notifications of all upcoming recordings.